Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Like many people of a certain age, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to the world of Warhammer through a variety of accessible gateway games. Heroquest, Advanced Heroquest, Battle Masters, just to name a few. But these sorts of games, they're no longer available, or if they are, they're not as accessible as they once were. So this does beg the question, does Warhammer The Old World need a gateway game? Now, before we go into detail, I do want to quickly acknowledge, I think it's important to note, the Games Workshop of the early 1990s, which is when the games I just mentioned were about and being published. That was a very different beast to the one that exists today. So I am fully mindful that what worked then may not be the answer in 2025. That being said, if Games Workshop does want Warhammer The Old World to stand the test of time, and again, I know there's people out there who are saying the whole Warhammer Old World thing is just a short-term cash grab. That's not something I buy into personally. I think it is here for the longer haul. But if that is the case, then it needs to be able to attract new players. It's not just going to be enough for it to be tailored really for the returning veterans of Warhammer Fantasy Battles and grabbing a few people on along the way from the Total War Warhammer series, for example. Warhammer was, and let's face it, is expensive. The game is also centred around armies of 2,000 points. Whilst armies are smaller these days than they were back in the days of 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and let's face it, the size of armies in that edition were unusually large, and this has been seen to be one of the major barriers to entry, which ultimately led to the demise of the game so many people loved. And let's face it, it wasn't just Games Workshop's fault. Yes, it was to an extent their fault. They gave us rules like Horde and Steadfast, etc., which really promoted those massive units of infantry. But it was the community, particularly the competitive scene, which moved games from that 2,000 point standard to 2,400 or even 500 points, which allowed armies to take all of their toys and not have to make such difficult decisions. Certainly when putting the army together, that is. But that in turn did lead to armies getting bigger. Now, as we've seen the old world becoming more established as a game, I'll be honest, I've seen less and less games focused on a smaller point size. Yes, when the game came out, there was a lot of events, there was a lot of people playing at 1250 because that is the amount of points you could get from one of the two starter boxes, be it the Bretonnians or the Tomb Kings. But moving away from that, we're now increasingly seeing that 2,000 point limit. This means for someone to enter the game from a standing start, they're going to have to amass quite a large collection of troops. Now, admittedly, with the rise of third-party providers and 3D printing, of course, this is probably the easiest it's ever been. And as long as a player's not fully committed to Games Workshop only, of course. But even so, it is a long and expensive project to get to 2,000 points. And I'd suggest the number of people with the capacity to buy and paint an army in a weekend or so are, in reality, few and far between. And so we come to entry games, skirmish games and board games which allow a player to explore the world setting using a version of the core game mechanics and to do so relatively quickly without a ton of expense. Across the wider wargaming hobby, we've seen a big rise in skirmish-style games. Lions Rampart, ZTV, Frostgrave, there's clearly a market out there. And Games Workshop do have spin-offs like this for some of their other games. Warhammer 40,000, that has the likes of Necromunda, Combat Patrol. Age of Sigmar has Spearhead and Warcry. So what about the Old World? Now, Warhammer The Old World is itself not a mainline game, and I think this means a spin-off to act as a gateway game seems incredibly unlikely. but I do think there's some merit to it. With the Battalion box sets not including a character, which this excludes the Bretonnian and Tomb King launch box, they were fundamentally different, obviously, because they came with the rulebook, they came with characters, they came with everything you needed to get going in the game. It's a very different concept to the Battalion boxes, which only contain a blob of core troops and then either 2 special or 1 rare choice. That being said, the lack of a character, etc., means there's not an obvious way for introducing a small-scale game. You can't just pick up one of these games and play them against each other in a legal format because there's no characters. And in any event, I'll be honest, I'm not sure that Warhammer The Old World necessarily scales well when you start to reduce the number of points. I think you'd need to tinker with it quite a lot. Certainly any game less than 1,000 points is going to be a little bit on the tricky side. Now, personally, I would love to see an affordable, quick playing game of Warhammer The Old World, one that could appeal to a new generation of players. Because after all, without that steady flow of people to share and enjoy our hobby with, where would we be? Oh, at the start of the video, I mentioned games no longer being accessible, not even existing anymore. Well, obviously, Heroquest has been relaunched, but it's priced as a premium board game. So this isn't one for kids to jump into in the way that it was marketed back in the day. It's also no longer got its connection, to the rest of my knowledge, to the world of Warhammer. It's not a Games Workshop product anymore, even one in association with another company, such as Milton Bradley. I have to admit, part of me did think initially when it was re-released a year or so ago that maybe Warhammer Quest would be starting to step into the bounds of the gateway game, which I've been talking about today. But obviously the Warhammer Quest we saw was really incredibly different from the original Warhammer Quest, the dungeon crawler with a wizard, barbarian, etc. Which owed a lot to the old sort of Heroquest style of game. It's been 7 or 8 years now, I guess, since I last played Warhammer Quest. It was a lot of fun. It could be a bit frustrating at times, but with the right players, it could be a really enjoyable experience. And I think these are the things, those enjoyable experiences set in the world, are so valuable to bringing people into the wider game of Warhammer. But tell me, what do you think? Do you think it's something Games Workshop should be considering? A new gateway game, a specialist game to support a specialist game in the realm of Warhammer The Old World? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you think there is a suitable game on the market that's readily accessible, again, do let me know. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've liked it and others like it, do please consider subscribing to the channel. It is the best way of keeping abreast of the latest videos. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.